I saw my son's car and decided to surprise him for his birthday by hiding in the back seat with his gift. Then he got in with someone who said, "Your pathetic mother won't be a problem much longer." I couldn't believe when I saw who was sitting next to him. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. My name is Margaret Chen, but everyone calls me Maggie. At 68, I thought I knew my son better than anyone. I was completely wrong. It was June 20th, David's 40th birthday, and I had his favorite strawberry cheesecake from Miller's Deli clutched in my hands. I'd been crouched in his Toyota for 15 minutes, giggling at my own brilliant surprise plan. The birthday ambush was going to be absolutely perfect. Then, I heard voices getting closer and squeezed down behind the passenger seat, my heart racing with excitement. The car door clicked open, and David slipped behind the wheel. But he didn't turn on the music like usual. Another door slammed shut. "You're certain this will work?" a man's voice asked as he settled into the seat beside David. I almost choked on my own breath. It was Robert Chen, David's uncle. My own brother-in-law, the same Robert I'd helped through his messy divorce last year when I gave him $25,000 to pay his lawyer fees. "Absolutely," David replied, his tone sharp and unfamiliar. The old woman signed every document I put in front of her after Mom's cancer diagnosis. Medical power of attorney, insurance changes, everything. She was too scared and confused to read the fine print. My heart stopped beating. What documents? What changes? And the inheritance money? Robert asked with interest. David laughed, a sound that made my stomach turn. "Already moved to my personal account. She thinks it's still in the family trust for her medical bills. I convinced her it was safer that way during her treatments." The cake box shook in my trembling hands. The inheritance money? The $80,000 my late husband left specifically for my healthcare needs? "Your weak mother won't cause problems much longer," Robert said coldly. "Once we get her declared mentally incompetent from the chemo brain, we'll move her to Green Valley Care Home. She'll think it's temporary." Temporary? My son was planning to abandon me in a nursing home. "The facility costs will drain whatever's left in her accounts within 2 years," David continued without emotion. "But that's not our concern anymore." I covered my mouth to stop myself from crying out. This was my David, my baby who used to make me breakfast in bed every Mother's Day. What if she gets suspicious? Robert wondered aloud. "Robert, she won't. Mom trusts me with everything. Her illness has made her completely dependent on me. This couldn't be easier." The engine roared to life, and as they drove to celebrate his birthday, I sat frozen in the back seat holding cake for a son who was stealing my future while I fought for my life. But David had made one terrible mistake. He'd forgotten that his weak mother was also a retired police detective. The 25-minute drive to whatever restaurant they'd picked felt like hours. I stayed hidden, my detective instincts kicking in as I tried to piece together their scheme. When the car finally parked, I waited until their footsteps faded before crawling out and calling a cab. Back home, I sat in my living room staring at the untouched cheesecake. The same living room where David had cried in my arms when his father died 5 years ago. Where I'd celebrated his graduation from college. How had I been so blind? The truth was, I hadn't been blind. I'd just been too sick and scared to see clearly. It started after my cancer diagnosis 6 months ago. David had swooped in immediately, so caring, so helpful. "Mom, let me handle your paperwork," he'd insisted. "You need to focus on getting better, not worrying about bills and insurance forms." I'd been grateful. Terrified of dying and overwhelmed by medical documents I didn't understand. When David offered to manage everything, I'd signed whatever he brought me. "Just a precaution, Mom. This lets me handle your medical decisions if the chemo affects your thinking." That's how he'd explained the power of attorney papers. "We should move your inheritance to a medical fund for easier access during treatments." That's how he'd described stealing Dad's money. I trusted him completely. My caring, devoted son who visited every day during my chemotherapy. Why wouldn't I trust him? The warning signs had been there, though. How he'd started making decisions without asking me first. How he'd become secretive about my own medical bills. The way he'd rush me through signing papers, claiming the doctors were waiting. And Robert, I should have questioned why my brother-in-law was suddenly so interested in my healthcare plans. He'd never cared about family before. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. David's name lit up the screen. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, keeping my voice normal despite my racing heart. "Hey, Mom. Sorry I couldn't answer earlier. Robert and I were having dinner for my birthday." The lie came so naturally to him. "Oh, how nice, dear. Did you have fun?" "Great time. Listen, I need to discuss something important with you. Can I stop by tomorrow? There are some medical decisions we need to make." My blood turned cold. What kind of medical decisions? "Just some updates to your treatment plan. Nothing serious, but the doctors want everything settled quickly." "I'll bet they do," I thought. "Of course, honey. Whatever the doctors recommend." "Perfect. I'll be there around 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. And Mom, don't stress about anything, okay? I'm handling all the complicated stuff." After he hung up, I sat in the growing evening shadows, Dad's portrait watching me from the bookshelf. My husband had always warned me about trusting people too easily. "Well, James," I whispered to his photo, "turns out you were right to worry about people taking advantage of me. But you also taught me something else. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them." David had just shown me exactly who he'd become. Now it was time to figure out how I was going to fight back. I barely closed my eyes that night. Every time I tried to sleep, I heard Robert's voice calling me weak. By 7 a.m., I was dressed and ready for battle. If David thought I was just some helpless cancer patient, he was about to learn otherwise. I might be 68 and fighting illness, but I wasn't defeated yet. My first stop was Miller's Deli. Sarah Miller had known me for 15 years, ever since I'd helped find her missing teenager during my police days. "Maggie," she called out when I walked in. "Don't tell me David didn't love his strawberry cheesecake. I made it extra special for his birthday." "Actually, Sarah, I need to ask you something, and please be honest with me." I leaned across the counter. "Has David ever been in here with a middle-aged man? Tall, gray hair, expensive suits." Sarah's smile disappeared. "Well, yes. Several times recently. They always sit in the corner booth and talk very quietly. Last week, they were looking at some important-looking papers." Important papers. The confirmation hit me hard, but I kept my face calm. "Did they seem friendly?" "Maggie, they looked like they were planning something." It made me uncomfortable. "Sarah, please promise me you won't mention this conversation to anyone." She nodded, worry creasing her face. "Maggie, is everything all right?" "It will be," I said, surprised by my own confidence. My next stop was Riverside Bank, where I'd kept my accounts for 20 years. Janet Rodriguez, the manager, welcomed me with her usual warm smile. "Mrs. Chun, what can I help you with today?" "Janet, I need to see all my accounts, every single one, and I need to know who else can access them." Her expression became concerned. "Is there an issue?" "I hope not, but I need to be certain." What Janet showed me made my hands shake with rage. David wasn't just listed as an emergency contact anymore. According to recent paperwork, he had full control over every account I owned. I was barely a secondary holder on my own life savings. "When did this happen?" I asked, staring at signatures that looked like mine but felt foreign. "About 4 months ago. You came in with David, and you seemed very tired. The chemo treatments were really affecting you, so David handled most of the explanations." Tired. That's what they'd call it when they eventually locked me away. Poor Maggie, too tired from cancer to manage her own money. "Janet, I need copies of everything. Every form, every signature, every change made to these accounts in the past year." "Of course, Mrs. Chun. Should I be worried about something specific?" I thought about my conversation with David, about his casual mention of medical decisions that needed to be made quickly, about nursing homes, and how weak mothers stop being problems. Let's just say I'm suddenly very interested in understanding what's been done to my accounts. As Janet printed the documents, I realized something that should have terrified me, but somehow made me stronger. David controlled my money, my medical decisions, probably my entire future. But David had forgotten something important. His weak mother used to catch criminals for a living. The documents Janet gave me revealed the full scope of their plan. Over the past 4 months, David had quietly transferred control of my entire financial life to himself. My checking account, savings, even my retirement fund, all moved under his primary control. But the cruelest discovery was my health insurance paperwork. My cancer treatment coverage had been changed to a cheaper plan with higher deductibles. David was literally profiting from my illness. I sat in my car outside the bank, studying page after page of forged signatures and manipulated documents. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Running late tomorrow, Mom. Let's make it 11:30 instead." Perfect. That gave me extra time to prepare for our medical discussion. At home, I spread all the evidence across my kitchen table. The same table where David used to do homework while I worked late shifts. I called my old partner from the police force, Detective Lisa Park. If anyone would know how to handle family fraud, it was Lisa. She'd investigated dozens of elder abuse cases. "Maggie, you sound different. What's happening?" I told her everything. The overheard conversation, the stolen inheritance, the forged power of attorney documents. This is classic financial elder abuse combined with medical exploitation. It's becoming epidemic. What can I do? First, you need a lawyer who specializes in elder fraud. Second, you need evidence of their conversations. Third, you need to be extremely careful. If David realizes you're investigating him, he might have you committed immediately to prevent you from fighting back. Committed how? Maggie, with your cancer diagnosis and his power of attorney, he could have you declared incompetent due to chemo brain. Once you're in a facility, reversing that becomes nearly impossible. After Lisa gave me contact information for a specialized attorney, I sat looking at David's police academy graduation photo on my mantle. Honor student, community volunteer, the son who'd followed in my footsteps into law enforcement before switching to security consulting. When had my principled, honest son become this calculating thief? The doorbell chimed at exactly 11:30. I quickly locked the evidence in my safe and went to answer the door. "Hi, Mom." David leaned down to hug me, and I had to force myself not to pull away. He looked professional in his dark suit, carrying his leather portfolio like he was conducting business, which I supposed he was. "Coffee, sweetheart?" I asked, leading him to the kitchen. "Sure, thanks." He sat at the table and opened his portfolio. "So, I wanted to talk to you about some changes your doctors are recommending for your care plan." I sat across from him, hands folded, playing the role of the trusting sick mother. "Your treatments are getting more complicated to coordinate. The doctors think it would be better if I had complete medical authority to make decisions quickly when you're too tired from chemo." Too tired to make decisions about my own treatment. How thoughtful of him. "There's something else," he continued. "The doctors are concerned about you living alone during treatments. They're recommending a care facility where nurses can monitor you around the clock." I arranged my face into an expression of concern. "A care facility? For how long?" "Just until your treatments are finished. Maybe 6 months. 6 months. I'd researched Green Valley Care Home yesterday. The average stay for elderly patients was 3 years, and most never left. "We've found an excellent place," he continued. "Green Valley Care Home. Very well regarded, and they specialize in cancer patient support." Here it comes, I thought. The only issue is cost. Your insurance won't cover all of it, so we'll need to use some of your inheritance money. There it was. "I don't know, honey," I said carefully. "This house has been my home for 30 years. David's expression hardened slightly. "Mom, you need to be realistic. You can't take care of yourself during chemo. What happens when you're too sick to drive? When you forget to take your medications? I feel capable now. For now. But cancer treatment gets harder, not easier. Trust me, I've researched this extensively." The arrogance in those words made my skin crawl. "I've researched this. Not, we've discussed this with your doctors." "Well," I said slowly, "I suppose I should consider what's best for my health." Something flickered across his face. Relief. Greed. "There's not much to consider, Mom. The doctors want you to start there next week. If we wait longer, they might not have a bed available." Next week. The timeline was accelerating. Let me think about it for a couple of days, I said. David's jaw tightened. A couple of days might be too long. 3 hours later, I sat in Michael's office, watching him review the bank documents with growing anger. This is systematic financial abuse, he said finally. Your son didn't just take advantage of your illness. He's been planning this theft for months, using your cancer diagnosis as cover. Is there anything I can do? Absolutely. But first, I need to ask you some tough questions. Do you remember signing these power of attorney papers? I closed my eyes, thinking back to those early weeks after my diagnosis.
Some of them.
David said I needed to sign papers so he could help coordinate my treatments, but I don't remember giving him complete financial control. That's exactly how these predators operate. They strike when victims are most vulnerable, scared, sick, overwhelmed. Your son exploited your illness. The word predator stung. This was my child we were discussing. What are my options? We can challenge all these documents, argue that you were coerced while dealing with a serious illness. We can also file criminal charges for elder fraud and medical exploitation. But Mrs. Chun, you need to understand something important. What's that? Once we begin this process, your relationship with David will be destroyed forever. Are you prepared for that consequence? I thought about the conversation I'd overheard in his car, about Robert calling me weak, about David planning to warehouse me in a nursing home while stealing my inheritance. Michael, what relationship? He's already decided I'm disposable. Then let's make sure you're anything but disposable. Michael explained our strategy. We'd need to gather more evidence, document his financial crimes, and prove that I was mentally competent despite my illness. It would take time we might not have. The most crucial thing right now is that David doesn't suspect you're investigating him. Can you manage that? Can you pretend everything is normal while we build our case?
Could I?
Could I smile and play the helpless cancer patient while secretly documenting my son's betrayal? Mrs. Chun, are you all right? I looked up at Michael, this stranger who was offering to help me fight for my life, and made a decision that would change everything. Yes, I can do that. But I need to ask you something. Is it legal to record conversations in this state without consent? Michael smiled grimly. Why do you ask? Because David wants to discuss my medical care again this week, and I think it would be very helpful if we had a record of exactly what he's planning to do to his weak mother. Mrs. Chun, I think you're going to be just fine. As I drove home, I passed Green Valley Care Home. I'd driven by it countless times without really seeing it. Now I studied the building carefully. The small windows, the residents sitting listlessly in the lobby, the sadness that seemed to hang over the place like fog. Is that where David pictured me spending my final years, forgotten and drugged while he and Robert spent my father's inheritance? Not if I had anything to say about it. But first, I needed to have a conversation with Robert. It was time to confront my brother-in-law directly. Finding Robert's office was easy. His consulting firm had a website with his photo and address. Robert Chin worked from a fancy downtown office building, the kind that charged more per month than most people made in salary. I parked across the street and waited, watching the building's entrance. At 12:45, Robert emerged wearing an expensive overcoat and headed toward the business district. I followed him to an upscale steakhouse where he met David for what appeared to be a celebration lunch. As I watched them toast with expensive wine in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, I wondered where Robert was getting money for his lavish lifestyle. His consulting business had been struggling since his divorce, yet here, he was living like he'd won the lottery. Unless he had additional income sources, like access to his sick sister-in-law's inheritance money. That afternoon, I drove by the care facility David had mentioned. Green Valley Care Home looked even worse up close. I called pretending to inquire about rates for a family member. The administrator was happy to discuss their services and mentioned that David Chun had already put down a substantial deposit for a private room. Move-in date was scheduled for next Monday, just 5 days away. He seemed very concerned about his mother's deteriorating condition, the administrator confided. Said she was becoming confused and unable to care for herself. Confused and unable to care for myself. That would be their official story. That evening, David called to check on me, his voice warm and caring. How are you feeling about our conversation today, Mom? I've been thinking about what you said about the care facility. I took a deep breath and played my part. You're right, sweetheart. I probably do need more help during treatments. Maybe Green Valley would be good for me. The satisfaction in his voice was unmistakable. I'm so glad you're being sensible about this. I was worried you might be stubborn. Stubborn, like wanting to stay in my own home, was some kind of character flaw. When would I need to move in? I asked. This weekend. I know it seems fast, but they had a cancellation and we should grab the spot before someone else does. This weekend. 4 days to steal my life completely. And, Mom, there are a few more papers the facility needs you to sign. I'll bring them by Thursday morning. More papers to sign, more of my freedom to surrender. Of course, dear. Whatever they need. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen making lists. Every lie David had told, every document he'd forged, every dollar he'd stolen, every plan he'd made to abandon me. By the time I finished, it covered 4 pages. James' photo watched me from the windowsill, and I could almost hear his voice. Maggie, that boy isn't the son we raised. He was right. The son we'd raised would never have stolen from his dying mother. But David had made one critical mistake in his planning. He'd assumed I would stay the same scared, sick woman who'd signed whatever he put in front of her. Thursday couldn't come soon enough. I was looking forward to our conversation about those facility papers. Almost as much as I was looking forward to the conversation he didn't know we were going to have about his crimes. Thursday arrived gray and rainy, perfect weather for confronting family betrayal. I'd been awake since 4 o'clock, testing the recording device Michael had provided. It was tiny and nearly invisible once tucked into my sweater pocket. Just press this button to start recording, he'd explained during our Wednesday meeting. The battery lasts 6 hours, and the sound quality is crystal clear. At exactly 10 o'clock, David arrived carrying his portfolio and wearing his most reassuring smile. Morning, Mom. Rainy day, isn't it? Yes, but cozy inside. I agreed, leading him to the living room. Coffee, please. He settled into Dad's old chair and opened his portfolio with practiced efficiency. I brought the papers Green Valley needs you to sign. I pressed the record button as I poured his coffee. What kind of sign here, and initial there? I picked up the first document, pretending to study it carefully. It was actually a revised power of attorney that would give David complete authority over my medical treatment, including end-of-life decisions. This seems very thorough, I observed. It has to be, Mom. I need to be completely honest with you about something. His voice took on a grave tone. I'm worried about your mental clarity. The chemo is affecting your memory more than you realize. Affecting my memory? There was that accusation again. Have you noticed? Yesterday when I called, you couldn't remember our conversation about the timeline. And last week you asked me to repeat the same information 3 times. I hadn't done any of those things, but I could see his strategy clearly now. Oh my, I hadn't realized it was that noticeable. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. Chemo brain is very common. But it's why we need to get these legal protections in place now, while you can still legally consent. While I can still legally consent. The implication was clear. Soon I wouldn't be able to. David, can I ask you something directly? Of course, Mom. Are you stealing my inheritance money? The question hung between us like a storm cloud. David's face cycled through several expressions before settling on hurt disbelief. Mom, how can you ask that after everything I've done to help you through this cancer? I went to the bank yesterday. They showed me that Dad's inheritance money has been moved to accounts I can't access. His composure cracked slightly. I explained this already. It's for your protection and medical expenses. You're not thinking clearly anymore. Last month, you almost sent money to that fake charity that called about veteran donations. I'd never received any such call, but David's lie was delivered so smoothly, it was almost believable. And what about Robert? Why is he involved in my medical decisions? What about him? Are you two planning something together? Another flash of surprise crossed his features. We've discussed your situation. As family, we're both concerned about your welfare. Why? I think it's interesting that you're putting me in a nursing home and accessing my inheritance at the same time. Very convenient timing. David set down his coffee cup, with deliberate control. Mom, nobody is putting you anywhere. We're finding you professional medical care where you'll be safe and properly monitored during treatment. Green Valley Care Home has already received a deposit, David, for a room starting Monday. His face went completely blank. How did you find out about that? Does it matter how I know? He leaned forward, and for the first time in my life, I felt threatened by my own son. Mom, you're making this much more complicated than it needs to be. Making what complicated? Your transition to appropriate care. You can't live independently anymore. You can't manage your own medical decisions. The sooner you accept reality, the easier this will be for everyone. Everyone meaning you and Robert. David stood up abruptly. Robert has nothing to do with your medical needs. Really? Because I saw you having lunch with him yesterday. Expensive celebration at Morrison Steakhouse. What were you celebrating, David? You followed us? His voice turned cold. Mom, that's stalking behavior. That's exactly the kind of paranoid activity that proves you need supervised care immediately. I need supervised care because I caught you stealing from me? I'm not stealing anything. He slammed his hand on the table, making me flinch. This inheritance was going to be mine and Robert's eventually, anyway. I'm just managing it more effectively while ensuring you get proper medical care. There it was. The truth finally exposed. Effectively, I repeated.
Yes.
Do you have any idea what it costs to care for a terminally ill parent? The facility fees alone will consume your savings in 18 months. This way, we preserve family assets while ensuring you receive appropriate treatment. Family assets. My father's life insurance had become family assets that needed preserving. David sat back down, his voice returning to its earlier reasonable tone. Mom, just sign the papers. Let me handle all the details. You won't have to worry about medications or bills or any of it anymore. I looked at my son, this stranger wearing David's face, and felt something fundamental break inside me. Not my heart, that had shattered when I heard him call me weak in his car. This was something deeper, the final destruction of the bond that had connected us since his first breath. No, I said quietly. No what? No, I won't sign the papers. No, I won't move to Green Valley. And no, I won't go quietly while you and Robert steal my father's money. David's mask finally fell away completely. You don't have a choice, Mom. I already have medical power of attorney. I can have you declared incompetent due to chemo brain. Can you?
Yes.
And after your behavior today, following us around, making these paranoid accusations, I think that's exactly what I'll have to do. I smiled then, probably for the first time since this nightmare began. David, sweetheart, there's something you should know about your paranoid mother. What's that? I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out the recording device, still running. I've been recording our entire conversation. The blood drained from his face. You can't do that. Actually, I can. One-party consent state, remember? You learned that in your police training. David stared at the device like it was a weapon pointed at him. Mom, delete that recording immediately. I don't think so. If you don't delete it, I'll have you committed for psychiatric evaluation tomorrow. Go ahead and try. I'll be interested to see how a judge reacts when they hear you admit to stealing inheritance money for effectiveness purposes. We stared at each other across my living room. 40 years of motherhood dissolving into this moment of pure hostility. Finally, David gathered his papers and stood up. This isn't over, Mom. No. I agreed, still smiling. It's just getting started. After David left, I sat in my kitchen, shaking not from fear this time, but from pure adrenaline. I'd confronted him. I'd fought back, and it felt amazing. I called Michael immediately. Mrs. Chen, how did it go? I got everything. He admitted to stealing Dad's inheritance, to planning to have me declared incompetent, to already having filed power. My second call was more difficult. I dialed my sister Carol in Seattle, the sister I hadn't spoken to in 3 years because of a foolish argument over Mom's jewelry after her funeral. Maggie? Is that really you? Hi, Carol. I know it's been too long, but I need to tell you something urgent. I told her everything. The theft, the nursing home deposit, the recorded confession. By the time I finished, Carol was sobbing. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I never trusted David completely. He always seemed too smooth, too calculated. But I never imagined anything this horrible. Carol, I might need you to fly up here. If this goes to court, I'll need family testimony. I'll book a flight tonight." "Maggie." "Yes. I'm proud of you for fighting back. Mom and Dad would be proud too." That evening, I was preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Robert standing on my porch wearing his most charming smile. I opened the door, but didn't invite him inside. "Robert, this is unexpected." "Margaret, we need to talk." "Do we?" "David told me about your conversation today. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding." I almost laughed. "What kind of misunderstanding? May I come in? It's getting cold out here." Against my better judgment, I let him into my dining room. He sat at my table like he owned it, which I supposed he thought he soon would. "Margaret, David is deeply concerned about you. We both are." "How considerate. This paranoia, these accusations against family, they're not like you. Has your oncologist mentioned anything about chemo affecting your mental state?" The audacity took my breath away. "Robert, I know exactly what you and David are planning. We're not planning anything except what's best for your health and recovery." His voice was smooth as honey, but his eyes were calculating. "David loves you so much. It hurts him to see you struggling with these delusions." "Struggling with what exactly?" "With reality, Margaret. You followed us to lunch yesterday. You think David is stealing from you. You're recording private family conversations. These are concerning behaviors that suggest your treatments are affecting your judgment. I studied this perfectly dressed man who is trying to gaslight me in my own home. Tell me something, Robert. How long have you been planning this scheme?" "Planning what scheme?"
The theft.
"The nursing home. Taking over my life while I'm fighting cancer." His mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something predatory underneath. "Margaret, I think you need professional psychiatric help. I think you need to leave my house." He stood up, straightening his expensive tie. "We're trying to be patient with you, but David has obligations. To his career, to his future, to managing family resources responsibly." "His future? You mean my father's money?" "I mean the wise management of family inheritance for everyone's benefit. Everyone meaning you and David. Everyone meaning the people who have futures to protect." The words slipped out before he could stop them. "The people who have futures?" I repeated. "And I don't have a future?" Robert realized his mistake immediately. "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is. That's exactly what you meant." He headed toward the door, then turned back. "Margaret, David is going to resolve this situation with or without your cooperation. It would be much easier for everyone if you just accepted help gracefully." "Is that a threat?" "It's friendly advice from family who cares about your well-being." After he left, I triple-checked all my locks and called Michael's emergency line. "They're escalating," I told him. "Robert just tried to convince me I'm having psychiatric delusions. And he basically threatened me. We need to file charges immediately. Can you be in my office first thing Friday morning?" "I'll be there. And Mrs. Chun, don't let them into your house again. If they're desperate enough to threaten you, there's no telling what they might try next." As I got ready for bed, I realized I wasn't the same person who'd hidden in David's car just a week ago. That woman had been trusting, vulnerable, focused only on surviving cancer. This woman was done being anyone's victim. But I also realized that David and Robert weren't going to surrender easily. They'd invested too much time and effort into their plan to let it collapse now, which meant I needed to be prepared for whatever desperate measures they might attempt next. Friday morning brought crisp sunshine that made everything seem possible. I arrived at Michael's office early, carrying a folder containing copies of every document David had ever asked me to sign. My sister Carol sat in the waiting room, having arrived on the red-eye flight despite her fear of flying. "You look stronger," Carol observed as we waited. "More like the old Maggie." "I feel like I'm finally fighting back after months of being pushed around." Michael's assistant called us back, and we settled into his office, overlooking the city. "I've reviewed the recording," Michael began. And it's even more incriminating than I hoped. David essentially confessed to multiple felonies. But there's something else we discovered that you need to know. He pulled out a thick investigative file. I had my team research both David and Robert's recent financial activities. What we found is very interesting. What kind of interesting? David's security consulting business has been operating at a loss for over a year. He's been living entirely off the money he's stolen from your accounts. Carol leaned forward. How much money are we talking about? Over the past 8 months, nearly $150,000 from your father's inheritance and your medical fund. The number hit me like a physical blow. $150,000. Dad had worked 2 jobs for 15 years to build that nest egg specifically for my healthcare needs. There's more, Michael continued. Robert Chen has an interesting background. He was sued 2 years ago by his elderly mother-in-law's estate. She died and left everything to Robert instead of her own children. Suspicious how? She changed her will 1 month before her death, giving Robert complete control. Her family claimed elder abuse, but Robert settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Carol and I exchanged horrified looks. He's done this before, I said. It appears so. And there's something else you should know. The care facility they want to move you to, Green Valley, has been cited multiple times for patient neglect and overmedication. It's essentially a place where inconvenient family members are warehoused and forgotten. I sat back in my chair, trying to process everything. So they steal my money, drug me into compliance, and leave me to die in a The room fell silent except for the sound of traffic far below. I thought about Robert's cold calculation, his threats, the way he tried to convince me I was losing my mind. What's our next step? I asked. We file criminal charges immediately. Elder abuse, medical fraud, theft, conspiracy. I'll also petition the court to freeze all accounts they've accessed and get a restraining order preventing them from having you committed involuntarily. What about the nursing home? We'll get an injunction blocking any involuntary admission and expose Green Valley's violations to the state health department. But Mrs. Chen, you need to understand something crucial. Once we file these charges, there's no reconciliation possible. This will permanently destroy your relationship with David and probably split your extended family. I looked at Carol, who squeezed my hand supportively. Then I thought about the conversation I'd overheard about being called weak, about being seen as nothing more than an inconvenience to be eliminated. Michael, that relationship was already destroyed. I just didn't know it yet. Then let's make sure justice is served. As we left the law office, Carol linked her arm through mine. Maggie, are you absolutely sure you're ready for this? Once those charges are filed, David will know you mean war. I'm counting on it. But as we drove home through the busy streets, I wondered if I really was prepared for what came next. Because if Michael was right about Robert being a serial predator, then I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance. I might be fighting for my life. That evening, as Carol and I sat in my kitchen reviewing our legal strategy, the phone rang. David's name appeared on the caller ID. Answer it, Carol whispered. Let's see what he has to say now. I picked up the phone, putting it on speaker. Hello, David. Mom. His voice was tight, barely controlled. We need to talk immediately. I think we've said everything we need to say. No, we haven't. I'm coming over right now. I'd rather you didn't. I'm not asking for permission, Mom. I'm coming over and we're going to settle this situation like adults. The line went dead. Carol and I looked at each other with growing alarm. Call Michael, I said. Tell him David is on his way over and he sounds furious. Should we call the police? I thought about it carefully. Not yet, but have the number ready. If he tries to force his way in, we call immediately. 25 minutes later, headlights swept across my front windows. But when I looked outside, I saw 3 cars in my driveway. David, Robert, and a third vehicle I didn't recognize had arrived together, and none of them looked like they were here for a peaceful conversation. The doorbell rang aggressively, followed by loud pounding on the door. I looked through the security peephole to see David and Robert flanking a woman in a business suit, all 3 looking grim and determined. Mrs. Chen, a woman's voice called out firmly. This is Dr. Susan Walsh from County Mental Health Services. Open the door, please. My blood ran cold. They'd brought a psychiatric evaluator to have me declared incompetent. Margaret, David called out loudly, clearly for the doctor's benefit. Please don't make this more difficult than necessary. We're here to help you. Mom, we know you're scared and confused, but Dr. Walsh needs to evaluate your mental state for your own safety. Carol moved to the window and peeked through the blinds. There's a fourth person sitting in one of the cars. Looks like a security guard or orderly. My hands shook as I realized what was happening. They weren't just here to evaluate me. They were here to take me away immediately. Call Michael now, I whispered to Carol. This is an emergency. She dialed while I continued watching through the peephole. David was testing the door handle, checking to see if it was locked. Mom. His voice was louder now, more aggressive. Don't make this harder on yourself than it needs to be. Dr. Walsh is here to help assess your condition. The pounding became more insistent. Mrs. Chun, the doctor's voice joined in. I understand you're frightened, but I'm here to ensure your safety and well-being. Your family is very concerned about your recent erratic behavior. Erratic behavior. They were building their case in real time, creating justification for whatever they planned to do next. Michael's on his way, Carol whispered, hanging up the phone. And he's bringing police backup. Mrs. Chun, Dr. Walsh called out again. I need to inform you that your son has filed an emergency petition claiming you're a danger to yourself due to psychiatric complications from your cancer treatment. I'm legally authorized to conduct an involuntary evaluation. Involuntary evaluation. The words that would end my freedom forever. I heard the sound of a key turning in my front door lock. My heart stopped. David still had his emergency key to my house. The front door opened and suddenly they were inside, uninvited and unwelcome. Mom, David called out, his voice echoing through my hallway. Where are you? Dr. Walsh needs to speak with you. Carol and I pressed ourselves against the kitchen wall, trying to stay hidden. I could hear their footsteps moving through my living room, searching for me systematically. Check upstairs, Robert's voice directed. She might be hiding up there. Hiding, like I was some kind of escaped patient rather than a homeowner protecting herself from intruders. Mrs. Chun, Dr. Walsh's voice called out, professional but firm. I'm here to conduct a mental health evaluation. Your family reports that you've been exhibiting paranoid delusions, recording private conversations, and making false accusations of theft. These are serious symptoms that require immediate assessment. She's been refusing medical care, David was explaining loudly, obviously for Dr. Walsh's benefit, claiming that doctors and family members are conspiring against her. Classic signs of paranoid psychosis brought on by chemo brain and cancer-related stress. I see, Dr. Walsh replied. Has she been evaluated by her oncologist for psychological side effects? She refuses to see any doctors now. Claims everyone is part of some elaborate scheme to steal her money and put her in a nursing home. Footsteps approached the kitchen. I found them, Robert announced. I stepped out from behind the wall, Carol beside me, both of us trying to look dignified despite our fear. Get out of my house, I said firmly. David held up his hands in a gesture of false calm. Mom, please don't be frightened. Dr. Walsh is here to help evaluate your condition and make sure you're safe. I don't need evaluation. What I need is for you to leave my property immediately. Dr. Walsh stepped forward. She was middle-aged, professional-looking, carrying a medical bag and clipboard. Mrs. Chun, I'm Dr. Walsh from County Mental Health. Your son filed an emergency petition expressing concern about your mental state and ability to care for yourself safely. My mental state is fine. What's not fine is my son stealing my money and planning to abandon me in a substandard nursing home. I almost smiled. As a matter of fact, I do. I pulled out my recording device and pressed play. David's voice filled the kitchen clearly. This inheritance was going to be mine, and Robert's eventually, anyway. I'm just managing it more effectively. Dr. Walsh's expression changed noticeably. Mr. Chun, is this your voice on this recording? David's face flushed red with anger. She's been secretly recording private family conversations. That's illegal surveillance and proves she's paranoid and delusional. Actually, it's completely legal, I replied calmly. One-party consent state. You taught me that during your police training, remember? Robert stepped forward, his voice dripping with false concern. Dr. Walsh, you can see how paranoid and combative she's become. Recording family members, making these bizarre theft accusations, barricading herself in her house. She clearly needs immediate psychiatric intervention. The accusations aren't bizarre if they're true, Carol interjected, speaking up for the first time. And I have bank documents proving everything she said. Dr. Walsh looked around the kitchen, taking in the obvious tension, the family dysfunction, the fear in the air. Perhaps we should all sit down and discuss this calmly before making any decisions. There's nothing to discuss, I said firmly. These people broke into my house using a key I didn't give them permission to use. I want them to leave immediately. That's when I heard the beautiful sound of sirens getting closer. David's face went pale. What did you do? I called my attorney and the police when you threatened to come over here against my wishes. The sound of car doors slamming echoed from my driveway, followed by heavy footsteps on my porch and a loud, authoritative knock. Police. Open the door. David, Robert, and Dr. Walsh exchanged panicked looks. Their carefully planned ambush had just become a crime scene. Mrs. Chun. A strong voice called from my front door. This is Officer Martinez. We received a call about forced entry and attempted kidnapping. I walked to the front door, Carol right beside me, leaving David, Robert, and their fake evaluation team standing in my kitchen like the criminals they were. When I opened the door, I saw Michael standing behind 3 uniformed police officers, his expression grimly satisfied. Mrs. Chun, are you all right? Officer Martinez asked. We received reports of breaking and entering and attempted involuntary commitment fraud. I looked back toward the kitchen where David was probably trying to figure out how to explain this situation. Officer, I'd like to file charges against my son for breaking and entering, financial elder abuse, medical fraud, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Mom, David's voice called out desperately from the kitchen. You don't understand what you're doing to our family. I smiled for the first time since this nightmare began. Actually, David, for the first time in months, I understand exactly what I'm doing. The look of absolute shock on his face when the officers walked into my kitchen made every terrifying moment of the past week worthwhile. Justice, it seemed, was finally about to be served. 8 months later, I stood in my backyard watching the sunrise paint my garden in shades of gold and pink. The same garden David had planned to abandon when he sold my house. The same house where I still lived, still independent, still fighting cancer on my own terms. The legal battle had been swift once all the evidence came together. David pleaded guilty to elder abuse and medical fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. 3 years probation, full restitution of stolen funds, and a permanent restraining order. Robert's case was more complex. Michael's investigators had uncovered evidence linking him to 4 other elderly victims besides his former mother-in-law. He was currently serving 7 years for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Dr. Walsh lost her license for participating in fraudulent psychiatric evaluations and faced her own criminal charges. I took a sip of my morning coffee and checked my phone. Carol had sent photos from her new house just 2 miles away. After everything that happened, she decided to move back home permanently to be closer to me. Life's too short for family grudges, she'd said when she arrived with the moving truck last month. My phone rang. Detective Lisa Park's name appeared on the screen. Morning, Maggie. Are you ready for your big day? Today was the opening ceremony for the Margaret Chin Cancer Support Center, a project I'd funded with part of the restitution money David had been forced to repay. The irony wasn't lost on me that his theft had inadvertently funded something that would help other cancer patients avoid the isolation and vulnerability I'd experienced. Almost ready. Carol's coming by at 10 to help set up. I still can't believe you named it after yourself. I laughed. Lisa, I spent my entire life putting everyone else first. I figured it was finally time. After hanging up, I walked through my house, preparing for the celebration later. In my living room, I paused at the family photos on the side table. Most had featured David at various ages, graduation, birthday parties, holiday gatherings. I'd taken them down after the trial, unable to look at his smiling face without remembering his betrayal. But last month, I'd put up new photos. They showed me at various stages of my cancer treatment, surrounded by real friends and supporters, looking determined and strong. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 o'clock. Carol stood on my porch carrying boxes of decorations and wearing the brightest smile I'd seen in years. "Ready to celebrate your victory?" she asked, giving me a tight hug. "It doesn't feel like victory," I replied honestly. "It feels like survival." Sometimes they're the same thing. We spent the morning setting up tables and hanging banners at the support center. By noon, dozens of cancer patients, survivors, and their families had gathered to celebrate. Mayor Johnson gave a speech about the importance of community support for cancer patients. The local news station interviewed survivors. Children played in the family area we'd created specifically for patients with young families. As I watched the celebration, I thought about the woman I'd been 8 months ago, trusting, passive, focused only on surviving treatment while letting others make all her important decisions. That woman would have been devastated by what I'd done to David. Would have felt guilty about sending her own son to prison, about exposing his crimes, about destroying the illusion that we were a loving family. This woman felt proud. "Mrs. Chun." A young voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see Emma Rodriguez, a 10-year-old whose mother was receiving treatment at the center, holding a small potted plant. "I brought you this for your garden," she said shyly. "My mom said it's special." I knelt down to her level. "What kind of plant is it, Emma?" "It's called a survivor rose. Mom says they bloom even when everything else looks dead." For a moment, my heart raced, wondering if David was violating his restraining order, but the message was from someone else entirely. "Mrs. Chun, this is Detective Rodriguez. Robert Chun was sentenced today. 7 years, no parole for 5. Your courage in fighting back helped us save 6 other potential victims. Thank you for your bravery." 7 years. Robert would be in his 70s when he got out, too old to prey on vulnerable cancer patients with the same efficiency. And 6 other families had been saved because I'd found the strength to fight back.